All right, welcome to Chapter 6, Part 1. There are two parts to this chapter. The first part is energy and metabolism, and we're going to cover, what energy is, different forms of energy, kinetic versus potential energy. We'll talk about the laws of thermodynamics, the first and second, and we'll look at metabolism, anabolic versus catabolic reactions, the role of ATP in reactions, then metabolic pathways, and finally top it off with a topic called bioenergetics. Energy. Energy is anything that has the ability to do work on matter. Matter was anything that has mass and takes up space. So anything that can cause matter to move or to change is energy. And there are many forms of energy, and you're familiar with many of these. Light energy, chemical energy, sound energy, heat energy, electrical, nuclear, and there are other magnetic energy. There are other energies that aren't listed here. But all of these types of, or forms of energy can be broken into two general types, kinetic energy and potential energy. And oftentimes they can be both potential and kinetic. So types of energy, anything that is currently doing work on matter, any energy that's currently doing work on matter, and oftentimes you'll hear the word motion thrown in there. That's kinetic energy, the energy of motion. If something has the potential to do work on matter, but isn't currently doing work on matter, that's potential energy. If we look at the water that's backed up behind this dam, because of its position, because of as it gets deeper, it creates a force that's creating potential energy. Once we let it go and the water starts to flow, and this is a different stream, but once it's flowing, now it has kinetic energy. If we can do the same thing with a membrane, if we take ions and we pump them all to one side of a membrane, they don't want to be there together. They probably have the same charge. They're pushing against each other. And so now but while they're all packed on one side of the membrane, that's potential energy. As they start to move across the membrane to reach equilibrium, now it's kinetic. If we think about the octane, this is a structural chemical formula for octane. This is the ball and stick model for octane. Octane is a hydrocarbon in gasoline. It's got eight carbon atoms. If it's gas in the tank of the car, when the car's at rest, then it's potential energy. When it's actually being combusted in the engine to make the car move, now it's kinetic energy. Thermodynamics is when we study the transformations of energy, and energy can change form. I mean, if we look at this diagram, sunlight is coming to the earth as photons of light energy, but it's going to be absorbed by special molecules in the leaves of plants. And in those leaves, photosynthesis is going to occur, and we're going to convert some of that energy from the sunlight into stored chemical energy of sugars, of glucose. And then when an animal comes along and it feeds on that glucose, it can oxidize the glucose to generate other stored chemical energy that can then be used for the animal to move, to grow and maintain. So there's another change. And so the first law of thermodynamics is really talking about those transformations. And the first part of it is the total amount of energy in the universe is constant. We can't gain or lose. Energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only change form. Okay? That's the first law. The second law says that the transfer of energy is not completely efficient. And each time with each chemical change, every transformation, a little bit of the energy is going to be lost as heat energy. You see, energy as photons of light or a molecule of glucose is highly organized. And energy doesn't want to be organized. It wants to be in a state of randomness. And the most random form of energy is heat energy. And so ultimately, all energy wants to become heat energy and dissipate away from the Earth back to the universe. Now, you're going to read in your textbook the term entropy, which they're saying, and entropy is matter going from a state of order to a state of randomness. But when we talk about energy doing this, the correct term is enthalpy. Enthalpy is a tendency of energy to migrate towards a state of randomness. And if you look back at our diagram, as some of the sunlight is converted to sugars, some is lost as heat energy. As some of the sugars are consumed by the animal and turned into different energy that it can use to move, grow, and maintain, some is lost as heat energy. So every time there's a transformation, a little bit of energy is lost as heat energy, dissipates away to the universe. Again, here's some. This is a tasty looking ice cream cone, and here's some little kids playing. And the idea is that they consumed the ice cream cone, and now they're converting that stored potential chemical energy in the ice cream cone, and turning it into kinetic energy of movement. And of course, they're generating heat energy, and that heat is going to evaporate away. Part of that heat energy is used to maintain our bodies at homeostasis, but whatever we don't need beyond that is going to radiate away from us into the universe. Here's a situation where light energy is being used by the leaf to make sugars. Kinetic energy of photons of light into the stored potential energy of the sugars in the leaf. And some heat energy is being lost by the plants during photosynthesis too. Has to satisfy the second law of thermodynamics. So what I want you to do is pause the video for a second, and I want you to think about how your body has both potential and kinetic energy at any given time. So go ahead and pause, think about it, write out your answer. All right. Well, there's a variety of ways that your body has both potential and kinetic energy. In your cells, in your bloodstream, you have a certain amount of glucose at any time that can be burned right away. You have glycogen, which is animal starch. We talked about that way back in chapter 3. That's stored potential energy that can be used when you need it. You also have stored fat in your adipose tissue. That's potential energy. Okay. In terms of kinetic energy, every activity you do that involves using energy. So breathing, your heart beating, pushing blood through your veins, when you flex your muscles, when you walk, when you stand, when you run, everything, when you think, all require kinetic energy. Now, energy plays a huge role in chemical reactions. In any chemical reaction, there's going to be free energy on both sides. Remember, reactants become products. So there's going to be energy on both the reactant and the product side. But one side is going to have significantly more than the other. And so what this does is that it lets us take all chemical reactions and think of them as one of two. Either the excess free energy is being added with the reactants and stored into the products, and that then is an anabolic or endergonic reaction. The old term is endergonic. If the excess free energy is released with the products, then it's a catabolic reaction. So if you look at our first example, we have some small molecules. Energy, we're going to input excess energy. We're going to use that to put these together. You remember the process we used to put these together in cells? That was dehydration synthesis. And now we've got a bigger molecule. There's going to be a little bit of energy released as heat energy. There has to be to satisfy the second law. Okay, but now we've stored energy in the bonds between these monomers, and that makes it an anabolic reaction. So the anabolic reactions in your body are where you're building the things that cells need. Okay, if the excess free energy is released, so in our second example, we're taking that polymer, and we're going to break it down. You remember the process used to break that down? You have to add water. We call that hydrolysis. Okay, when we hydrolyze this polymer into 4 separate monomers, we release energy that was used to build those bonds. And now that energy can be used elsewhere in a cell. Now, we had to use some energy to start this process. This isn't a free process. But the excess of energy is over here. That makes this a catabolic reaction. So in your body, when you're breaking down the nutrients you take in to release energy that you can use to move and to grow and maintain, those are all catabolic reactions, digesting your nutrients. Metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical reactions in a cell, in an organism, in a population, in a community. I mean, there's various ways we can measure metabolism. But if we're talking about, like in you, we could calculate your basal metabolic rate. which would be the total of all the chemical reactions occurring in you over a given time period. This is going to include the anabolic reactions, where we're taking here's two monomers of looks like glucose, and we're going to put them together to build a disaccharide. Okay, we built a glycosidic bond between two monomers. This is maltose, two glucose monomers. And in catabolic reactions, where we break down, here we're going to break down that maltose with water, hydrolysis, going to form two monomers of glucose. Okay, that's a catabolic reaction. So again, all the anabolic, all the catabolic together give us the total metabolism of a cell or an organism, tissue, organ, whatever level of the hierarchy we want to measure it at. Now, chemical reactions don't occur spontaneously. Otherwise, everything that could burn would already be burning, right? And that means any nutrients you had in your body, you would already be metabolizing those. And it's a good thing that reactions don't occur spontaneously, because we wouldn't be able to store excess energy. If we look at the campfire, or the example here, we can pile up the small stuff and then bigger sticks and then bigger sticks and eventually railroad ties and barn beams. But we've got to add a little bit of energy to start the reaction. And then we're hoping that as the smaller things burn, they release enough excess energy to act as the activation energy to start more of the material burning. Okay, so this is an example of catabolism, or catabolic reaction, where we're taking things that are fairly ordered, we're breaking them down, we're releasing light energy, we're releasing heat energy, and you can hear sound from a fire, sound energy too. Okay, the minimum of energy that's required to start the reaction is called the energy of activation, or EA. Okay, so if we take chemical reactions, our anabolic and catabolic reactions, the reactants have energy already. Unless we're at absolute zero, which is minus 273 Kelvin, all molecules, all atoms have energy. Okay, it isn't until we get to that temperature that energy goes away. And so our reactants, if this is energy and this is time, our reactants are at a certain energy level. They have this much energy. Okay, and in this reaction, we have to add all the way up to here this much energy before our reaction is going to proceed. And now as the reaction proceeds, this area where the reaction proceeds is called the transition state, because this is where we go from reactants with energy to products very quickly. Okay, in this reaction, our products are at a higher energy level than our reactants. Is this this is an anabolic reaction. I can't ask you what it is because the answer is right there. Okay, in a catabolic reaction, again, our reactants have a certain amount of energy. We have to add activation energy before the reaction proceeds. And now, because our products are at a lower energy level, this is the amount of energy that was released from the reactants. Here, this is the amount of energy that we stored in the products. Now, in a chemistry lab, we can always add however much activation energy is needed. Okay, but in a cell, most of the time we can't, and I'm going to explain that a little bit. But let's talk a little bit about this energy that's been added. Okay, where are we going to get that energy? Well, there are a variety of molecules in cells that shuttle energy from one place to another. Okay, and one of these, probably the most important, is the molecule adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And molecules that transport energy often do it by giving up a phosphate ion. Now, this is what ATP looks like over here. It's an adenosine backbone, which is an adenine nucleotide with a sugar ribose. So this is a nucleotide that would be used to build RNA. And then there are 3 phosphate groups. Now, each phosphate group has a triple negative charge. Right? They very much are repelling each other. They don't want to bond. It takes a lot of energy to force them to bond. It takes energy plus an enzyme. Okay? And once they bond, when they give up that phosphate through hydrolysis, right? So another enzyme is going to cause this ATP to give up a phosphate, and when it does, energy goes with that phosphate. Now, not all of the energy that it took to attach it, because some has to be lost as heat energy to satisfy the second law of thermodynamics. But a lot of energy goes with it, is what makes ATP such a good energy shuttling molecule. Okay, a lot of the energy that was stored in that bond gets used in whatever reaction needs energy. Phosphorylation is when you add a phosphate to a molecule, and almost all cellular work depends on ATP providing a phosphate molecule to energize molecules. Here we see reactants that have a phosphate attached to them, and now when that phosphate is kicked off, the energy that was with it allows these two monomers to be linked together. Here's a motor protein that's carrying looks like a centriole along the cytoskeleton, the microtubule or the intermediate filaments of the cytoskeleton. Okay, and when the phosphate is attached, it's in one position. When the phosphate releases, it ratchets it a little bit, and that allows it allows this to move the filament. Here you see a membrane protein that when it's attached to a phosphate, it has one shape, and when it releases the phosphate, now it changes shape, and it allows it to do something. So almost all work in a cell is fueled by ATP phosphorylating molecules. But the thing is, ATP is really a short-term energy storage molecule. It doesn't hold energy for very long. In fact, you are constantly using ATP in your body. Scientists have estimated that you use, just an incredible amount of ATP, maybe a ton of ATP a day in all your different reactions. And like, well, how am I going to replace that much ATP? Well, you don't stockpile ATP. Instead, what you do is you recycle ATP, and this is the ATP cycle, right? So here's my ATP with 3 phosphates in the form where it has the most energy, most potential energy. And when it gives up that phosphate to do something in the cell, now it's an adenosine diphosphate. And if I'm going to recycle it, I have to add a phosphate back on. To do that, I need energy to put that phosphate back on, and I get that energy by digesting nutrients. Okay, so we can store energy-rich molecules like a little bit of glucose, and then plant cells, amylose and amylopectin is digestible starch, animal cells is glycogen, and then finally fats, and we consume them in that order. Okay, but all of these can be metabolized to form ATP, so we can recycle the ATP just as soon as we use it. Now, you're going to read about coupled reactions in the textbook, and what a coupled reaction means is that 2 reactions are occurring at the same time concurrently, and we kind of saw it in the ATP cycle before, where here's our ATP at its highest energy level, and then we add water, we hydrolyze it, kick off a phosphate, and now we got ADP plus a free phosphate, and we use that energy that's released for all of our anabolic reactions. Okay, our endergonic reactions, where we're fueling things that happen in the cell. Either we're building molecules, we're building protein, we're building organelles, we're building more membrane, or we're providing the energy that allows an organism to function. Okay, in order to build the ATP back, we couple this. Actually, this would be anabolism of ATP with the catabolism of nutrients within the cells. Okay, so catabolic reactions that break down nutrients release energy that allow us to build or anabolize ATP. And when we catabolize ATP, we break it down, that fuels anabolic reactions elsewhere in the cell. And that's what it means to be coupled. That's what it means to be coupled. And this is why we are continuously recycling ATP in our cells. Now, very few molecular changes in cells occur in a single step. Most require a series of steps to work from what would be our initial reactant to a final product. And we call this a metabolic pathway. In a sense, you could think about this as your journey through college. When you sign up for college, there isn't one class that you sign up for, or you go to that class, 4 days a week for 8 hours a day, and you do this for 4 semesters, and when you finish that class, you have your degree. Okay, instead, there are a variety of classes that you take, and each one works you closer and closer to your final goal. And the same thing is true in a metabolic pathway. When when photosynthetic organisms, plants, algae, are taking light energy from the sun and converting it to sugars, okay, and adding carbon dioxide and water to form sugar, glucose, right? That doesn't happen in one reaction. There's a bunch of reactions that occur. So it's a stepwise change, a little bit of change at a time. And the same thing is true during cellular respiration, which is the process of taking that glucose, breaking it down into carbon dioxide and water, and releasing the stored potential energy. It doesn't happen in one shot. It happens in a whole bunch of sequential small releases. It's kind of like the gas in your car, right? When you burn the gas in your car, you can't open the gas cap and hold a match to it to see how much gas is there, because if you ignite all that gas at the same time, you're going to blow up your car, and it's not going to do you any good either. Okay? But when you release tiny amounts of gas at a time to the engine, and you explode those tiny amounts of gas to make the pistons go up and down, turn the crankshaft, turn the drive shaft, make the car go, okay? By releasing that energy just a little bit at a time, now it's safe. And the same kind of thing happens in your cells. But we're going to look at photosynthesis and cellular respiration in the upcoming lectures. Not the next one, but the next few after that. So, discussion question: is photosynthesis an anabolic or catabolic pathway? And then what evidence supports your answer? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, give it a few seconds, think about it, write down your answer, and when you're ready, fire it back up again. All right, photosynthesis is an anabolic pathway, right? We're taking light energy from the sun and we're using it to combine water and carbon dioxide to form glucose, to store chemical energy in glucose. That makes it an anabolic pathway. And the evidence would be the amount of energy that's in the glucose that wasn't in the carbon dioxide and the water. The last thing we want to talk about in this video is bioenergetics. And bioenergetics is a fairly new study, and when I say new, means in the last 40 years. So maybe it's not that new, but when you think about how long we've been studying biology, it's new. This is the study of how energy flows through a living system. Now again, a living system could be a cell, it could be tissue, it could be an organ, it could be an organ system, an organism, a population, or a community, maybe even an ecosystem. Okay, it just depends on what level we're studying. And again, in our world, most of the energy that sustains life comes from the sun. There are a few other sources. There's geothermal activity, and there's organisms who can get energy from non-organic compounds like iron or nitrate or sulfate. But the vast majority of life, ultimately, its energy is coming from the sun. And then as the energy from the sun filters through producers who make the sugars, that then can share with consumers, either animals that eat the producers or animals that eat other consumers. And when both of these die, they get broken down by decomposers. At every step of the way, we're releasing heat energy, which is going to dissipate back into the universe. And this is what bioenergetics does, is it studies this flow of energy. And when we put that together with what we know about metabolic pathways, now we have evidence of evolution. Now, evolution just means change in a species over time. And we have a lot of evidence of change in species over time. And if we look at a lot of different life forms, like plants and animals and fungi, the single-celled plants and animals, the protists, and then the two types of bacterial cells, the true bacteria and the more primitive bacteria, the archaebacteria, there are a lot of cellular metabolic pathways that all of these things have in common. And whenever there's a metabolic pathway that many things share, it's said to be highly conserved. And the reason it would be highly conserved is because it's the best way for the cell to do whatever it's doing. Okay? We talked about photosynthesis. The process of photosynthesis is very similar in all organisms that are capable of photosynthesis. The metabolic pathway is very much the same. When we talk about cellular respiration in an upcoming chapter, the way we break down sugars is very similar to the way bacteria break down sugars. Okay? And the reason is because it's the best way to break down sugars. Whenever something works really well, changes to that, mutations, are probably going to be terminal, meaning that they weed themselves out of the gene pool because they can't compete. The best way to do something is always going to outcompete worst ways to do something. And we can put that together. What it suggests is that all of these things probably evolved from a common ancestor. And that over time, and time is a long time, right? We think the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and that living things have been here for 3.5 billion years. That's a long time for organisms to adapt and evolve and develop specialized enzymes that help them to make the best of their environment and outcompete other organisms. So that's the end of this lecture. These are the key terms you're going to want to be able to understand and utilize. And then these are the key concepts that, between the terms and the concepts, again, these will be used when we generate the exam. You won't see a question written word for word like this, but there will be test questions that test your understanding of these key concepts.